Hey, wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 11 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Hard talk about hard money. For the last 20 years, I've been dedicating my life to Bitcoin, investing, and money. And I believe that in my lifetime, we will see a change of empire. And a change of empire is carnage, and everybody needs to prepare for it. And I believe in the Great Depression of the 2020s, that I released a video series not so long ago on. In fact, well, over a decade ago, I started uploaded a video on the Great Depression of the 2020s, 2009. Jesus, that's a long time. Sorry for the blasphemy. But also did a video series on that, and we are getting you ready for that. So we're experimenting with the format of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Last week, I went through the foundational knowledge, the geopolitical situation, 5,000 years of monetary history that led us to where we are today. Today, I'm going to be going through the macro and geopolitical side, a bit more that's happening on the Bitcoin side, and then we're going to go into the main bulk of the content on 6 types of money and how Bitcoin and CBDCs could be an existential threat to your bank account and how they are likely to manage it. So I believe that it's inevitable and everybody needs to prepare to live in a Bitcoin and central bank digital currency world. And so you can wait for it to happen or you can prepare yourself. And each and every week, we will go live to prepare for you. So let's jump straight in to the content. Firstly, if you like this, do me a favor. Let's get the algorithms moving. I'm not sure after last week whether we've been shadow banned. Maybe you got an email. Put in the comments if you think I have been shadow banned or whether this came up for you. Do me a favor, hit the like button so that more people can see this. Share this on social media. And if you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all so that you get a notification each and every time we go live throughout the week. I also give little tidbits from Twitter Spaces that I might be on. So let's just jump straight into it. So I got a few notes to take, or I've taken a few notes on what's happened this week. It's been a packed week on every angle, really. So there is a new prime minister, president, whatever we call it, in Argentina. And he is a Bitcoiner, or at least that's how he pitched himself. And he is a central bank slayer. He made a commitment that there is non-negotiable dollarization of the economy. So he's going to be moving to the dollar, which means that the country's future is going to be dependent upon the monetary policy of the proof of weapons Ponzi scheme called the US dollar. And the proof of weapons Ponzi scheme needs to continually push out IMF loans, as we covered last week, in order to fund the military industrial complex, in order to try and roll over the Ponzi scheme in a world where there's more debt-based dollars than there are dollars. And so therefore, as long as people will purchase those dollars, you need to find new markets for those dollars, and the IMF and all the other institutions are the way to do it. So Argentina is going to put its monetary policy in the hands of the Federal Reserve, which quite frankly has done a better job than Argentina because they are on the wrong side of the economic hitman loans. Remember, if you take out a loan from the International Monetary Fund, then you end up with all your money back in America, and you end up with all the debt remaining in your country, but they export the inflation by devaluing the dollar because America has so much US dollar debt. Same with every empire, by the way, same with the British pound, same with the Dutch guilder, and same with the next empire, whether it be the Chinese yuan or whether it be a global special drawing right, whatever it may be. But the debt remains in the country, and they then print money using their own currency in order to build up their dollar reserves. When they run out of dollar reserves because they've implemented all the austerity, all the tied loans, everything you need to do, subscribe to Western or American ideals, then you end up in a situation where you hyperinflate and destroy everybody's wealth, as has been the case across Central and South America, until one brave president comes along and says, we're going to implement a Bitcoin strategy, we're going to do some dollarization, and we'll let markets decide which currency we pick. So Argentina is down that path, and we shall see. El Salvador is a population of 6 million people. Argentina is, I think, about 45 million people. So if we get a Bitcoin strategy, and I'm not talking about one of them silly pay your taxes in Bitcoin. By the way, it's awesome for countries to say you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin, but what a joke. Could you imagine? That's like the biggest hit. Paying your taxes in currency that historically has gone up 113% per year, rather than using the pound, the euro, the Argentinian peso, whatever it is, that historically destroys your wealth if you hold it over the long term. So the double hit is you're paying your tax and you're paying it with Bitcoin, and we'll all end up Bitcoin pizza guys in the future, where you realize you spent 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 pizzas, and you've got a, where are we at right now? $37 million pizza were those pizzas. So Argentina is the net. We've got a new president. We're going to see whether we get a fractional reserve CBDC system, or we also get a Bitcoin system side by side. So congratulations to those that are happy with that news. We shall see what that means in the end. Also on the global macro side, there was meetings. Because America has committed itself to stand by Israel, China is coming along with lots of the Arab and Islamic countries across the Middle East, and they all met in China in order to try and get a ceasefire. At the same time, we have made progress. So the whole concept of not negotiating that was offered to Israel on day one, week one, is now being implemented. There's what's called a humanitarian pause, where there is a trade between the hostages and the prisoners, and a negotiation and a bit of a pause. And we shall see whether anyone gets blown up during that pause, which is what has happened historically before October the 7th, when thousands of those in Palestinians have been killed, disproportionate to those that have been suffering from terror and counterattacks as a result of this two-way terror. Okay, so we're seeing a humanitarian pauses happen in negotiation. Maybe, just maybe, that leads to stop blowing up children and stop blowing up, innocent people and civilians. But we shall see where it goes in this proxy war between America and Iran that has been executed through the Israeli lobby on the American side, and the funding of certain groups as a result of oppression, and many of the things we talked about last week. Okay, what else have we got? So let's get into the Bitcoin side. The Bitcoin, we are still in the cycles that we talked about last week. The cycle is playing it out to perfection, as it have every single halving cycle I've been through. This is my 4th. Are we on 4th? No, this is my 5th halving cycle coming through. We've got the exchange traded funds. That is where the SEC, since 2013, imagine this. Imagine how many pension funds could have protected themselves by having a portion of the portfolio, let's say 5% of their portfolio, in a Bitcoin ETF. That would have significantly outperformed all of the fund managers in the industry, and pensioners would be able to protect themselves from the inflationary proof of weapons blockchain called the US dollar, which is the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme, causing you, if you're close to the central bank and you're BlackRock or whoever it may be, that you can then get yourself on all these boards, negotiate yourself better deals, use the money close to the central bank. Obviously, you've got this whole fund management industry pooling together everyone's pension, because they need to protect themselves from the devaluation of fiat currencies. And so you end up with it all in the stock market and a stock and bond portfolio. But now if the ETF comes through, which looks like it's coming through, it looks like they wanted to wipe out some of the market manipulators, which we'll go through in a bit, in order to allow for the Bitcoin ETF to happen so that people can put it in their fund. And that means pensioners can now protect themselves in an apolitical way. Obviously, there's centralization. but it's a start, and it will bring in a lot of locked up money that contributes to the traditional financial system, leading into halving. And we have the halving cycle. Don't trade, don't get wrecked. In future videos, we'll cover more around how to be on the right side of these trends. And so that is really seems to be playing out exactly as it has in all other cycles. We shall see. Not financial advice, not investment advice. And so, just putting that out there. In other news, we had Binance. Binance was an exchange that was created in 2017 and became the largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. And it got fined $4.3 billion with a B, $4.3 billion for not having a robust anti-money laundering program and taking on US investors without having a license to work with US investors. The case showed that CZ, the leadership, the board, CZ has now stepped down, and he negotiated, much like Arthur Hayes from BitMEX, that he's now in the US. He's considered a flight risk, so he's not allowed to leave. And they're estimating that he may serve up to 18 months in prison for it. However, that may be like Arthur Hayes from BitMEX under house arrest. We don't know what will happen here. And he paid a $50 million personal fine, which is a drop in the pond relative to the wealth that he generated by being on the right side of Bitcoin cycles and being involved in operating an exchange in the wider crypto market. Now, when you look through the case, just digging in a little bit deeper, the fine was $4.3 billion, which I believe to be the biggest fine I know of for such anti-money laundering, certainly in the crypto space. But maybe I remember like the same time that Charlie Shrem got arrested for operating a Bitcoin exchange that engaged in some of the money that was coming through from the dark markets. He got arrested on the same day that HSBC got caught smuggling billions of dollars of cash in a truck for the Mexican drug cartel, where most money laundering happens. But now we've got these cases where it's been happening through Bitcoin exchanges, because the allegation is, and CZ pleaded guilty to funding certain terror groups, inadvertently or actually on purpose as well, through the exchange. And so this is like, some of the stuff that the traditional media use in order to try and take down the Bitcoin industry. The more and more of this stuff is, siphoned out through decentralized companies, the better. But let's tie that into the geopolitics. Obviously, all companies have to comply with anti-money laundering laws. If you don't do that, you end up in prison with a massive fine. As somebody that runs a financial services company, we have to comply with all of those laws, whatever your politics or ideology or whatever it may be. That's absolutely vital. And that's why we at Bank to the Future are the longest standing company in Bitcoin, because we complied with securities laws and various other things from day. And we were the first actually regulated crypto securities business. Okay, but let's follow the money and look through some of the flow of funds. Essentially, the allegation is, and what he pleaded guilty to, is that the biggest US accounts on the international exchange were reclassified as, rather country United States, they were reclassified as country unknown. And therefore, billions of dollars of American funds were then being traded without a robust AML program, means that they could have been trading with sanctioned countries and various other groups. And there were phone records where, CZ and Binance were essentially saying, why don't you create another company? This account is tainted. The compliance team have got it off, but you can create another account, and therefore deliberately did that, hence the big fine. Now, what is happening in that flow? Well, essentially, let's look at this. Funds is coming from America. They're being traded with what the US through OFAC would be classified as terror organizations. And then those funds were being traded with the two, hence the fine. but then the Department of Justice will find 4.3 billion. So now the proceeds of what they consider terror financing or crime go into the bank account of the Department of Justice. What does the Department of Justice do? Well, the Department of Justice, or the US Treasury, is applying for Congress approval in order to fund their proxy wars. And so you end up with, for example, 14.3 billion going across over to the other side of the Israeli lobby that is then used in order to fund some of the other two-way terror that ends up blowing up children and 5,000 to 6,000 children as a result of that. So, but that is called defense. And I just want to help you understand the hypocrisy of the system because it is really just a function of what one side decides to call the other side when both of them in these proxy wars between Russia and NATO, i.e. America, and the proxy war between Iran and America, which is currently happening with all of these children being blown up as a result of being caught on that, and other proxy wars which are trying to be prevented at the moment, which is when China reunifies with Taiwan, and when that strategically happens, and I covered some of the different trends. However, so you can see the flow of funds that happen when the money goes. And I've always said, follow the money if you want an indication of where things go. So that's the Binance side. That is going to be a criminal case. We are getting ready for the ETF, all the traditional players to get into Bitcoin. One of the companies I invested in very early on, Kraken, they also had an SEC case where they're being alleged to be trading, illegal securities, and therefore they have to come up to compliance with these different things. By the end of this, our industry has matured significantly. The market recovers. Bitcoin still does what it always was designed to do, give you the ability to own your own money, to spend your own money peer-to-peer, and to combat inflation and money printing by having a fixed supply that no government and no currency or no country can control through this innovation called proof of work, where it repurposes electricity into backing the world's first ever digital hard sound money. Also, in other news is the governance side. So we saw governance is becoming a really, really big thing. In advent of all of this blockchain stuff, where you have your proof of weapons network, which is a centralized database Ponzi scheme regulated by most central banks. Then you have proof of work, which is governed in a trustless environment where no one can change the maths and code, no one can corrupt the system. And then you have this proof of stake network, which is not actually interest, but it generates yield through sharing transaction fees. But those that accumulate the highest stake control the network, which is then technology that people can build central bank digital currencies and various other financial products and security tokens. In this whole rage, it's all about governance. So blockchain really is just a governance model put into maths and code, and Bitcoin is the only one where you can, have backed by that proof of work network that makes it where governments can't shut it down. Well, on the corporate governance side, we saw a lot from OpenAI. So obviously, Sam was, booted from his company, OpenAI. Then he went to work for Microsoft. And then the 750 people that work for Sam said, we'll all go to Microsoft. And 95% of the employees said, if you don't bring him back, we're going to Microsoft. And so that threat had a board shakeup, and Sam is back in. And Elon Musk decided to publish, as Elon is getting into the AI game, certain letters from the other 5% of the employees that said there are some dangerous things that Sam are working on. So all of these governance structures are becoming really, really interesting. For those of you that are Celsius creditors, you've seen the impact of governance. I don't want to go into this because it's boring for those not involved. But board governance really, really matters. And we are experiencing that as the SEC rejected part of the plan for that to reorganize. And we see the impact of the board members you choose and governance. So governance is a boring subject, but a really, really important subject. And as we transition to more AI-led central bank digital currencies, more decentralization, and other models, I think governance becomes an important thing, especially with the breakdown of empires. And is a central bank run by artificial intelligence with no central bankers in the next decade or so a possibility? And how is that governed? What impact does that have on borders, tax, all sorts of things? We are going to navigate the whole thing over. I've been doing it for the last 2 decades, wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, and covered central bank digital currencies and how it's inevitable, predictable, and guaranteed to move over to a more communistic way, if you want, of running economies, thanks to the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And then you have a transition where hard money prevails, and then central banks create the next Ponzi scheme with the next empire in a time of massive wealth inequality and wealth poor divide, and lots of extreme violence and revolutions and civil wars and global military wars that are often nowadays can be technology wars, currency wars, and the various other things that may come if this escalates further, that I was always looking to make sure that we're on the right side. Okay, so that is the geopolitical Bitcoin updates. Let me know in the comments section what you think of any of those subjects, and let me know what you would like to cover in future episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Now I want to move over to the educational piece. And understanding how central bank digital currencies and stable coins can be a real threat to money held at a bank. And in future videos, I think I'll do how I manage the amount of money I hold in a bank, how I manage expenses with the volatility of things like Bitcoin, and how to think about that in things like investing markets and various other things. We'll cover that all in future episodes. So if you would like to be notified as we do that, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. Right, 6 types of money. That's not 6, that's 10. 6 types of money that we're going to go through right now in order to understand the threat that the Bitcoin and CBDC world has to your money held at a bank. Now, firstly, fiat thinking versus Bitcoin thinking. This is a concept I've been trying to share with people over the last decade, ever since I Bitcoin. Hard money, like Bitcoin, is incredibly volatile when you're measuring it in fiat. And so fiat thinking is where you're measuring your wealth in pounds, euros, dollars. That means that you are measuring your wealth in something that is designed to go down in value. So if you do simple things like spend less than you earn and invest the difference, and you hold it at a bank, you get poorer and poorer and poorer, as inflation is a hidden tax on your savings, and therefore you have to work, depending on whether you believe in the consumer price index figures, up to 10% harder every single month to be in the same position. And that's why people reallocate their funds to assets. But those assets, through the Cantillon effect we covered last week, where the closer you are to the central bank, means that those assets go through pump and dump schemes as a result of the banks creating money as debt. Okay, right. So that's the traditional side. Bitcoin thinking is where you value your wealth in Bitcoin. Why this is important? So if you earn money in fiat, which is a great way for spending money, useless way for savings, the fiat currency took savings out of the equation. So you have to go straight from spending money to investment money with no savings in the middle, because fiat currency goes down in value and you get wrecked if you save in fiat currency. Bitcoin thinking is measuring your wealth in Bitcoin, which means when the price goes down, and we'll cover more fundamental principles of this in future videos, you end up being able to purchase more Bitcoin with your fiat currency. It's why I love Bitcoin bear markets. We've had one for the last 2 years. Most people wait till it goes to all-time highs and end up selling it at all-time lows, thinking that they're going to exit the market. Seen so many people get wrecked, and then they end up trading, looking for the next Bitcoin killer. I digress. But Bitcoin thinking is the concept of valuing your wealth in Bitcoin, so that when the price goes down, you end up with more Bitcoin. When it goes up, your wealth in fiat goes up. And I've covered this in many, many videos in the past. So When you think like this, you start thinking around, as I earn in fiat currency, what is and who profits from that money? How did that fiat currency actually get there? And so there are 6 types of money. There are more, but these are the main types of ones that I want to cover today to help you understand where we go next. The first type of money is what I call cash notes. It's the M0 money supply. The way it comes into existence is every central bank or government has in the case of UK, a royal mint. You will have a mint. It used to be the case that, money, the coins used to be commodity money. They used to be worth their weight. As they were chipped away, it used to be a fraction of the gold or the hard money. And as it turned into notes where you could store your gold with a goldsmith and they would issue you a receipt. And then companies through, for example, William Patterson, for example, or those in the families that were connected to many of the banking families that we covered in the last video, they lend and they get control over being able to control the central bank issuance. And then eventually you have a fiat currency, which is backed by law and the ability to pay for tax, which used to be convertible into gold, but that then gets removed. But how does it happen right now? Well, banks buy cash and notes in order to fulfill their ATMs. There is a war on cash. And so this is the money that is meant to combat the hidden inflation. So remember, banks create other types of money, as I'll go through. They create digital currency, the digital dollar, the digital pound, the digital euro. But the mint actually creates these paper notes and coins. And so if you have a $20 bill, it costs approximately 3 cents to print that bill. And so the mint will do that. And there's about, $19.97 margin in printing that $20. The treasury will sell it to a bank. A bank needs it in order to fulfill their cash obligations at the ATM. And that money is added to reduce the amount of tax that you need to pay. And it's called seigniorage income. So this is where the treasury and the amount of seigniorage income they make is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking as the central bank has this war on cash. And so the government makes less and less money through cash and notes. It's a shrinking form of money, but it is probably the most privacy form of money as well out there. Okay, so the benefit from that is you, essentially the taxpayer. It reduces the amount of tax you need to pay when it was a significant income, but over time, the profit from money creating has gone over to those that control the purse strings and the banking system and the central bank. So the second form of money is the money that you hold at a bank. It's a bank deposit. How is a bank deposit created and who profits from it? Well, the bank benefits from it. So originally in economics, you're taught that a bank is needed in order to put together borrowers and lenders. You imagine a pensioner out there that saved their whole life in cash. It gets inflated away if they didn't put it in the stock market, but that's used in order to issue loans to those that need to borrow it, maybe a student in the early days of their career. And then you have this concept of fractional reserve banking. Fractional reserve banking is where you actually are able to create digital currency every time you issue a loan. So the bank creates new money. You say that I want a mortgage. You sign the dotted line and a computer entry goes in. Brand new money is created. As you pay down that debt, the money supply shrinks. As you borrow that money, the money supply expands. It's called M1 and M2 money supply, depending on the type of product it is. M1 in the case of bank deposits. Then interest is incurred on top of it. Because the money to pay the interest doesn't exist, you always have to roll over, and debt infinitely, exponentially increases over time, where individuals have to go more into debt, corporates need to go more into debt, governments need to go more over debt. And if you have a system where it all breaks down, then the central bank comes in. And if they are the world reserve currency, they back it by the proof of weapons network through organizations like the IMF, United Nations, various other organizations to maintain the existing world order. And the one that controls the world reserve currency controls everyone else if you can get those loans out there. But you come straight back down, the bank makes all the money from that because they keep increasing the money supply. and the interest is new money, and therefore the bank benefits from that. This is why when you have a business cycle, they increase interest rates. Why? Because they're saying the prices are going up too much. We need to send more people bankrupt that took on that debt. So the very same people that saved the fiat-based proof of weapons blockchain Ponzi scheme, they are then sent bankrupt if they're too close to their debt leverage. And then they save the economy because them going bankrupt pushes down prices. The wealthy people then can accumulate those assets, and you get that wealth inequality that's designed into the system. And every cycle, it ends in an explosive debt cycle, which lasts normally about 100 years or so. So bank deposits is the second form of money. It is a digital currency where they have the legal right through stress testing, and organizations like FDIC, insurance funds, guarantee it. And every 10 years, the leverage gets too low, and we saw in 2023 where the whole system blows up, and therefore FDIC has to step in. But FDIC is like an insurance, a contribution from banks. They've only got 1% of deposits. So if more than one bank goes systemically risky, it goes over to the central bank. What does the central bank does? Well, they print the third form of money, which is quantitative easing. That is where the government needs to infinitely roll over their Ponzi scheme. Financial institutions and pension funds that are pooling together your money, they need to pay pensioners. So they have, rather than all stocks, they have debt as well. So they lend money to the government. They produce some of the demand. When the demand isn't there, you have countries like China and America relationship. China may purchase a bunch of those treasuries in order to hedge against their cycle. And then you end up where you export your inflation like we're seeing in Argentina. And hopefully if America and the Fed manage it better than their central bank, then you go to dollarization, and then you have the proxy wars. The other side of the proxy wars creates their own, like the BRIC currency. And then you have these epic proxy wars in order to try and build the new world order, which is what I believe we're experiencing in our lifetime. Okay, back to quantitative easing. So quantitative easing is just simply they fire up some digital currency, the government borrows it, and they purchase those assets. We were going through a quantitative tightening cycle where it was the opposite. It was rather than a low interest environment, it was a higher interest environment, and they were reducing the balance sheet by taking back some of those asset purchases. So quantitative easing is inevitable, predictable, guaranteed. You had it at scale during COVID, global financial crisis. And every time they try to go to quantitative tightening, it breaks something like the entire US banking system. Then you end up with the latest emergency, which is, holy shit, we need to fund a bunch of proxy wars. Let's get the taxpayers in the world empire to pay for it, to blow up more children in Gaza or wherever it may be next. So quantitative easing. Okay, that's the next form of money. So we've got 1, 2, 3. The fourth form of money is Bitcoin. We've already covered the proof of work network. Every 4 years, the money supply cuts in half. Every 10 minutes, it rewards miners. Anyone can become a miner. That industry becomes repurposing energy over time. So those countries that have wasted electricity, if they plug in their Bitcoin miners, they can connect to the grid and they can repurpose electricity in the countries that are able to generate that at the cheapest and most renewable and most effective way. So it's almost like, you end up with countries like Africa, which are able to repurpose that, get involved in Bitcoin mining. You have various other different types of geopolitical reasons why sovereign countries get involved in Bitcoin mining. And every country should repurpose some of their fiat currency Ponzi scheme and electricity in order to protect their country, because over time, then the Bitcoin fixed supply in the race for the last Bitcoin and the last transaction fees could end up wiping out. We saw this, for example, in Bulgaria once. They confiscated a bunch of Bitcoin from a criminal enterprise that was operating in Bulgaria. Once the Bitcoin got into the government, it just disappeared. But the value of that Bitcoin in the last cycle was greater than the Bulgarian national debt. So the price of Bitcoin through that supply eats away at the fiat currency, and you can reverse the trend. So Argentina, while it's dollarizing, should have a Bitcoin strategy as well. And like the El Salvador strategy, like every country should have eventually. And the last ones that will do that is like David beats Goliath, because the smaller countries with the least opportunity are going to be the most innovative, and the central banks that have the most to lose will be the last one. And you could end up with this flippening in national debt as the world leads to more hard money being the form and mechanism. Normally during war is when you have hard money becoming more important. So Bitcoin is that supply. There's only ever going to be 21 million. We've mined about 19.5 million. I haven't checked for a while. I've invested in many mining companies, been doing that since 2014, I believe, when I mined my first Bitcoin. And yeah, so that's the Bitcoin industry. That's the fourth type of money. Now we get into the ones that impact your banking. So if you, just like countries can, take a percentage of spend less than you earn and invest the difference, invest it in hard money that you don't intend to sell. If Bitcoin does what it has done in every 4-year cycle, you end up destroying all your debt. That's what happened to me. I purchased my first Bitcoin at $3 in 2011, set a rule that I need to have more Bitcoin every month than the previous month. And Bitcoin on average ended up performing 113%, smashing stock markets, smashing bond markets, smashing gold, smashing fiat currency. And so I was able to pay down my debt, my fiat currency debt, and then put myself in a position where my investments cover where I can spend time doing what I want and mess around on YouTube, creating content like this because I enjoy it, and don't need to monetize or have horrible adverts up there because you have the level of freedom that I would wish upon every single person by playing these different forms of money correctly over a 10-year period, rather than investing in pump and dump schemes, crazy things that people do in order to try and become wealthy and destroy their wealth because they've got a 1-year plan with high time preference rather than low time preference, longer terms. Cover more of those concepts in the future, but what's the fifth form of money? The fifth form of money is a digital version of a fiat, which is backed by the fiat. So PayPal, for example, came around, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, a bunch of other people. They said, let's create money for the internet. They ended up with PayPal. PayPal essentially backs all your money with bank deposits. You bring in a bank deposit, and then they're able to invest that money. So they essentially lend it to the government through treasuries. They earn the interest on the treasuries, but they give you a convenient way of transacting from one email address to another email address, backed by the banking system. So all the risk is in the banking system. They can reduce risk because, remember, fractional reserve banking, a bank deposit, is inherently risky. Because here's what I forgot to tell you. Fractional reserve doesn't exist. They loopholed it over time where the reserves are actually assets that were purchased with money creation. And so the money creation is the back of the reserve. And in the end, there is no reserve. They have stress tests, debt to leverage ratios, and all sorts of stuff. But those are assets which are dependent upon the credit rating of the existing empire, the government that backs it. When those changes, all those models break. And so there is systemic risk in the banking system. So that's why you end up with QE and those various other things. Right. So stablecoins. Stablecoins were a blockchain version of PayPal. They said, let's take a proof of work network like Bitcoin. And in 2013, they created the first stablecoin, Tether. It was called something different when it launched. And it was built on the Bitcoin network. And it says, for every dollar you hold you deposit at a bank, then we'll issue $1 of that stablecoin. And so it operates in a hybrid model between the blockchain world and the trust world. And the trust world says that we will have cash and cash equivalents. So it's similar to PayPal. We'll invest that money in treasuries. We'll publish what you got. And we'll issue you a token that is pegged to $1. So I can trade a digital dollar through the blockchain. And so Ethereum started getting more and more of these stable coins. But stable coins allow you to essentially send value, and the stablecoin issuer gets to invest the actual currency in an asset. And for example, like Tether, they end up lending it to the US government through the treasury markets. you get a way of transferring a digital dollar through a blockchain, and then they can use the interest on those treasuries through the debt-based Ponzi scheme to buy Bitcoin. And so you end up getting a free lunch from the government if you are a stablecoin issuer, depending on how you manage that. And therefore, you have to have a trust system. I'll go through a little bit more about that when we cover the risk to banking on stablecoins. Finally, the sixth form of money, central bank digital currencies. This is where the central bank, essentially issues a new currency. Now, this first happened in the analog world during the American Civil War, where Abraham Lincoln printed a bunch of greenbacks in order to fund the war. So that was the central bank, as it were, or the government just printing the money and issuing that money rather than doing it through the banking system. Central bank digital currencies are another form of doing that. Now, central bank digital currencies could be backed debt-free. So they can actually be a deleveraging of all the debt during a financial crisis. This is what I was predicting in my book. By the way, if you want to get a free digital copy of that book, it's an old book, but it's priceless. In terms of timeless, you can get a free copy. You don't need to go and buy it from Amazon. I'm writing my next book, so the updated one will be coming soon. But I'd love to give you that for free. Go to simondixon.com, and there'll be a yellow button there. You can sign up to my membership portal, where I have all the Great Depression of the 2020s video series, all my emergency broadcasts, and I email you every time I go live so you don't forget. And you can get a digital copy of the book. Enjoy it. It's my gift to you. Central bank digital currencies. That's where essentially the central bank just becomes the bank. And because it's technology, they could issue an app. During times of crisis, they could issue helicopter money like we saw during, the virus or whatever. But instead they were sending out checks. That could have been done by a central bank digital currency. Now imagine if your bank goes bust, or we end up with a bank crisis, systemic risk event. The government can come along and say, download this app. When you sign up to download the app, sign up to the terms and conditions that removes all your privacy, freedoms, rights. But your bank deposit is about to go bust. They can wipe out the bank. Now, many people think that central bank digital currencies compete with Bitcoin. No. They compete with banks. Bitcoin competes with fiat currency for your savings, not for your spending money. Stablecoins compete with fiat currencies for your spending money, and CBDCs disrupt the banking system, where the central bank can come along and run an economy similar to China, as it were. So remember what I talked about last week? America every day is looking more and more like China. All of these wars end up with you removing your freedoms in fear-based, and then when the system destabilizes, they could bail it out with a CBDC. Almost every country in the world has a pilot program for their central bank digital currency. In fact, if you look at China, they currently have a percentage, I think less than 1% still, in their central bank digital currency called DCEP. I think last time I looked, about $14 billion worth of yuans have been issued through, and they're doing their integration with WeChat Pay. They got the highest level of digital currency issuance through WeChat Pay and Alipay and various others, but they're already taking a percentage of their seigniorage. Why would they do that? Well, if you don't want the banks to create the money and you're too over leveraged and you are in wartime, then remember what happens during wartime. You can implement laws because the government takes over. We all become communist countries, rational during times of war. You may get martial law where the military takes over, and then you get the most draconian laws being passed because the government doesn't go through a democratic process. It's why you get these major changes during these war times. So be careful what you ask for. But CBDCs could be that mechanism for funding those wars, deleveraging the system, and they could be backed by loans to the US government, wiping out the bank. Remember, the bank gets to issue digital dollars, digital pounds, digital euros, backed by you taking on debt. What if you wipe out the bank? That's why the banks are very, very concerned about this. And what is the biggest threat to fractional reserve banking, which is inherently systemically a Ponzi scheme, is full reserve banking. It's why everyone that tried to create a full reserve bank, like Bliss Dixon and myself tried to, that we were going to launch at the first Bitcoin conference, but then you have to build it on top of a fractional reserve and they won't let you do it because they don't want the central bank cutting out the bank. But if your bank account is in a systemically risky event, they could wipe it out and go fully digital. It would need a digital ID. And you end up with the banks being wiped out in the middle. Systemically, if you just say, everyone, you had $10,000 at Chase or HSBC, now you've got $10,000 at CBDC, sign up to our terms and conditions. That could happen during times of war, rations, universal basic income, all of these different things, negative interest rates programmed into the money. You can see where we're going. Are governments going to destroy those currencies? Is Argentina going to have their own on top of their dollarization? Well, they're slaying the central bank. Maybe they have a Bitcoin strategy. Every country is going to be adjusting to this over the next few years, over the next decades ahead. And you need to learn how to navigate this. And fortunately, Satoshi Nakamoto gave us a gift, an exit of the CBDC system. Now, CBDCs will be very convenient. They'll be easy to spend. But so that's why you need to understand how to manage your affairs and your finances, especially during times of wartime economics, if we end up escalating, as it seems like everyone is doing to get there. So CBDCs are just centrally issued by the central bank, and they can be debt-free, and they can be a way for the government to cut out the bank and just go, rather than issuing bonds and selling them via the banks, and this is how they end up selling, or World Bank, bonds and various other things for the economic hitman to get the country deep into debt, so that you can then have the infrastructure tied loans where the debt remains in the global south and ends up coming back to the world empire. And that's all done through these international monetary fund loans, which are backed by world bonds. And those bonds are sold by banks. Banks create money through fractional reserve. And you have the Cantillon effect that I've always talked about. Okay, so why is central bank digital currencies and stablecoins such a problem? At the moment, stablecoins are worth just over $100 billion that have been issued. But in 2025, the Bank for International Settlements, while it was building its bridge between all of the central bank digital currencies in China, Hong Kong, Middle East, Taiwan, and Thailand as well, I believe. I need to look at the list, the BRICS nations. While they're building that settlement layer through the Bank for International Settlements, that is very, very disruptive in the traditional issuance model. And so by 2025, they've released guidance on how central banks can back their CBDCs by stablecoins, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, virtual assets, digital assets. They've said X% can be backed by this. They're putting out the rules and regulations. This comes into force in 2025. So through 2024, you'd expect these pilot programs to roll out. And as we enter into proxy wars escalating, this is how it all gets rolled out, implemented. And this is what you need to prepare yourself for, so that you can contribute and you can make sure you're on the right side of that change. But it's all backed by, so if you've got a US dollar stablecoin, it's backed by the credit rating of the US government. So this is very good for the government to borrow and roll over their debt-based Ponzi schemes, takes out the free market form of issuing money, which is fractional reserve banking, and transitions to more of a communistic way of organizing an economy, so that governments can get access to unlimited flow that always destroys their currency in a hyperinflationary cycle that wipes out everyone's wealth eventually. But you need to be prepared for that at some point. We don't know how long they can roll it over for. It may be the rest of your lifetime. That's why when I'm managing my affairs, I always say, here's a portfolio for the existing empire. Here's what happens when the empire changes, when a pandemic breaks out, when a bank goes down. And here's what happens if you are in the new empire, whatever that may be. And so I always have those 3 different buckets. We'll cover those in future videos as well. But these CBDCs and these stablecoins are backed by treasuries. And we already saw what happens when the government has to react to bank failures or existential threats, external threats like currency wars. Like if the China proxy war escalates into a currency war, then obviously if things get too bad, and obviously China wants to keep things in the status quo, but if it escalates where there's a change of world order, then you can use those financial weapons of mass destruction in order to take down the US banking system in some of these proxy wars. And so we saw how that happens this year. Silicon Valley Bank, Silvergate Bank, we saw that the emergency new funding mechanisms and loans that had to come in. And all that was required is you need to destabilize the bond market, create inflation. How's that done? Attack the Middle East. So if you're launching a war, against, for example, Russia that has a natural gas stream from Russia to Germany, and you want to actually take over that industry, then you get NATO to escalate. Then you end up with, some awful wars, which kills lots of people. But you get to then supply and control inflation, and America ends up the largest exporter or a significant exporter to pay off their rollover the scheme more, so that people are willing to purchase more of those debts. But if you go to a CBDC, you have a ready market by taking out the banks and cutting out those in the middle. That's where you can have the systemic risk in the banking system. But don't worry, I don't think it leads to you losing your money. It just leads to you losing your freedoms, signing up to the CBDC. So prepare. And that's what I hope that everybody's prepared for. Now, if you are in a country where you're not the issuer of the world reserve currency, then you need to be concerned about the countries like, we had some disastrous ones, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, Turkey, Argentina, Venezuela. We had some of the worst wealth destruction that takes people that have been saving their whole life and completely destroys their wealth. Inflation is no joke. At best, it's a hidden tax. At worst, it's a complete wealth destroyer that changes geopolitical power in times of debt-based Ponzi schemes and changes. So the CBDCs and stablecoins, they need to manage this because the more and more people, what is the biggest threat to fractional reserve banking? Full reserve banking. Full reserve banking is where you can, for example, it's a very, very efficient market. So for example, there's a stable coin called USDC. Full disclosure, I was talking about Kraken earlier. I should have disclosed I'm a shareholder in the company. USDC is issued by 2 companies I'm a shareholder in, Coinbase and Circle. And they're one of the second largest ones. Now, they're backed by treasuries, and you can see what assets they're backed by. And so when you have it, rather than having the government having to step in and QE having to step in to save the system, you have a free market way of market pricing. And so what tends to happen is the stable coin, in times of not knowing whether it's worth $1 or not, it depegs. And so USDC, during the bank crisis of 2023, or the bank run crisis, it held about $3 billion at Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank, we didn't know whether it needed an FDIC bailout. It got taken down by the government, increasing the interest rates in order to manage inflation in treasuries. It took down the bank. It led to everyone needed to withdraw at the same time. They had bad risk management, and then they need bailout by a larger bank, and everything gets gobbled up, and they get closer and closer to the central bank eventually. Okay. Yeah, so you end up having, I've forgotten even my trail of thoughts. Where was I going? Let me have a look at this. Oh, yes. Pricing, market pricing. So what happened when $3 billion of it was at Silicon Valley Bank is it depegged. So you could buy a dollar-backed stablecoin for approximately 90 cents or whatever it may be. I think it was 96 cents. Can't quite remember. but you have efficient market pricing with transparency of knowing the assets that it's backed by, so that rather than having to create a debt-based Ponzi scheme, you have full reserve banking, you have assets in the middle, and you have no fractional reserve, which destabilizes. And rather than needing a government bailout, you have market pricing. And so it became more and more efficient when they realized that the government was going to bail out the bank. And so it was much better to be in a stable coin than it was to be in a bank, unless the government can bail it out. And then you need FDIC. They didn't have enough there because it became systemically risky. And so you go past that, and then QE comes along, and then you have your hidden inflation, which devalues your savings. So you have to make sure you're into hard money. You see how this all works, cyclical. I know it's complicated. Once you've been through this, there are a few cycles, which is why you should subscribe to the channel. Repetition is the mother of all learning. I want to make sure you're on the right side of these curves. Okay. So real-time pricing is an improvement, and it is most likely to be implemented during a deleveraging event, and that will certainly lead to currency wars. And remember what I talked about last time, you're likely to lead to a Bretton Woods 3 if we end up with another world war. What happens during that? The losing nation needs to pay off the debts. They go into hyperinflationary cycles. They settle with hard money, and then you rebuild a new world order based upon the power struggle and which country managed to maintain itself while issuing the most amount of loans. So China's in the Belt and Road Initiative game, and you have this geopolitical power. Everyone picks their allies, and that sets the new world order after the next world, which I believe will be CBDCs. So you just need to be prepared for these different outcomes. And it is that way that stable coins and central bank digital currencies can't just be rolled out. It is the disruption of fractional reserve banking, which is why many of the banks are trying to tokenize their bank deposits at the moment. So there's going to be a whole lot of currency warfare. Private companies, that's why Facebook tried to issue one. They ended up getting shut down. Twitter said that it's not going to do, or X is not going to do it. But, you know, PayPal did it, and they end up with their regulatory crackdown as well. You're going to see more and more of this. The IMF is going to want to do it, upgrade its special drawing rights. And it's probably those that build it on top of a proof of stake blockchain will be once the stake is owned by enough financial institutions, but it's not built upon an interest-based system. So it replaces an interest debt-based system with a staking-based system, and a proof of work system is how you exit and protect yourself based upon the crazy actions of those that own the stakes, those that own the money, digital printers, and those that own the networks of the proof of weapon network. If you get yourself born into a country that gets on the wrong side of the proof of weapon network. And that is everything I've got for you. Let me see how we're doing for time. So, oh, wow, I'm exactly on the 1 hour mark. What I think I'll probably do is I'll probably end on the 1 hour mark. But Azad, are you there? I don't know if you're there. One thing we could do, and you can tell me, I've kind of put this as a surprise. If anyone's got any questions in the comments on YouTube, then we could take a few questions. Or if Azad says we're not ready for that, then we'll probably do that next week. Next week, what I'm going to cover is, I think I'll cover whatever the global macro news is, whatever the updates are, whatever happens in the Bitcoin side, the CBDC side, but I'll probably do a bit more of the personal finance side. Let me know in the comments section below whether you'd like to see more on that type of stuff, and we'll see what we can cover next week in the educational piece, depending on what comes. So, Azad, did you want to take a few questions from the comments section, or should we save that to next week? Okay. I don't think he's ready for it. Okay. All right. Well, and that's going to do it then for episode number 11 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We'll be back next week for episode 12. And always remember, you are alive while we are going through horrific times. And the Proof of Weapons Network is bringing out the worst in humankind, the worst type of justifications for the unjustifiable, the worst type of behavior in these proxy wars. always make sure that you get yourself on the right side of the information curve, commit to the truth. We may not, we may have our understanding of what the truth is, but always prepare yourself in this information warfare, in this currency warfare, because you are in fact alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Many are going to get wrecked from the proof of weapons blockchain. And I want to make sure that you're on the right side of change with the proof of work blockchain, and you're managing accordingly, and making yourself that you're on the right side of that change with peace, with love, with unity, even though it's driving us further and further apart and making these fake wars where we need to hate each other because of the different trends that we'll be covering on this channel. So I will see you next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 12. Peace.